Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. I am looking forward to having just a really honest and transparent conversation today with Lesa Koski. And I know that you are a mediation expert. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
Rhonda, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here and grateful for what you're doing. I think we're on a mission to change this divorce story, and we're kind of all in this together. And it's really fun to see how it is changing already in the amount of time that I've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you and I were having a little bit of a candid conversation, before we hit the record button, which I always love to be able to do. And then we can, bring that candid conversation to the audience as well. So one of the things that we were talking about is, mediation. What is it? How have things changed? What are some opportunities? What are some challenges with it? And I would just like to be able to kind of have a conversation around some of those things. But the first thing that I was thinking of is, what, from your perspective, and I know that you are an attorney and a mediator, right? But talk to us a little bit about what makes mediation a potential good fit for people that are contemplating or going through divorce.
Right. There's so many things that make it so beneficial. And I think the thing that I love about mediation is when you have children, being able to co-parent them is the greatest thing that you can do for those kids, so that they can be resilient and have a better life, through this process. So when you mediate, you work together and you can do a parenting plan, which I also have an online course. If anybody wants to get started on that, you can do your parenting plan before you even start the divorce process. It's amazing. And you just go to lesakoski.com. But so that's one reason. Just because you're going to be working together, it's so beneficial for your children. Divorce mediation saves time and money because you're not, fighting things out in court. You're working together. You get to pick when you're going to meet. It's not a court-ordered date. So the thing, Rhonda, you and I were talking about, so it's such an amazing thing. I've helped so many people. I have amazing clients that come to me. But sometimes even I can say it may not be a good fit. And the thing is you have to have two people who are willing to work together to design their own divorce, basically. And if you have a fear that you're not going to get all the information, or if one party is not willing to work together, it doesn't mean I've had people that haven't liked each other. I had the oddest case where I had a man and his wife come in, and they had been working with attorneys and they were begging me to help them. And they were late to our first meeting. And they said, "Oh, I had to go get her out of jail because she hit me in the face last night." And I was like, "No, I don't know if this is going to work." But it was such a good learning experience for me. I was kind of a new mediator. They were so dedicated to working together. There was love in there. And I had to realize they talked a little rough to each other. And I had to be okay with that because they were. So, but that being said, if you have a narcissist or someone who's hiding financial information and you're concerned about that, then mediation isn't the best option. And what I have a free consultation. I always, welcome people, get a feel for it. Meet with me. I always meet with both parties and I explain my services. And sometimes we get into a little bit of the nitty gritty about what they're going through, but it's so personal. And you have to be comfortable that you are going to be working with someone who is willing and able to work with you and share the information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and I think that's ultimately the key, right? I mean, I think coming to the table with some level of mutual respect and transparency, from my perspective, is really foundational for having a successful mediation. I mean, one of the things that you were mentioning is, the disclosure aspect. Are they, hiding things or moving things? That's what I call the damn method, right? And I'm not endorsing the damn method. But, they dodge the disclosure. They just avoid, they avoid getting assets valued. They misrepresent information. I mean, those types of situations are extra tricky for mediation because, again, you as a neutral third party, right, mediator,
Yep.
are working with the information that the parties bring to the table. And that's the information that you're working with. And so you're kind of like trusting, like on a scout's honor, I'm going to be, transparent and bring the stuff to the table. And if not, then that gets a little tricky.
Right. And Rhonda, maybe you can help me be a better mediator. So what I do is I do have them get their tax information. I do have them show me the supporting documents, but that's about as far as I go. I can't be the investigator. We have to trust. And I just let them know that probably it's going to be found out eventually if you do try to hide it. So please, put all your cards on the table. So is there anything else as a mediator that I can be doing to help people know that they're getting all the financial information that they need, or anything that I can watch out for if someone's hiding something?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because I think a lot of times people don't know if stuff's being hidden until you start kind of going down that path, and it's like, okay, well, hey, we got this statement in the mail. What is that? And sometimes I guess from my perspective, it's just providing a safe space for both parties to talk through some of that stuff. Like, I think a lot of times the women that reach out to me, part of their challenge, if they have started on the mediation path, is just feeling like either they don't know what's going on or they feel like their spouse isn't being transparent. And again, I know that you are in a limited, scope as far as what that looks like. But I think just for in my case, right, the women being able to feel safe to say, listen, I'm concerned. I have hesitations. I have reservations around XYZ, and knowing that they're going to be heard by the mediator, and then say, okay, well, how do we handle that? Can you get the information? Can you answer her question? That kind of stuff, I think, is as much as it's supposed to be kind of a safe environment. I know that that's not really what I'm hearing a lot of times. I think the other thing is, and I know this is, and I don't know if you do this or not, but like, I know that there are some mediators that we work with that will do a caucusing option where they will meet with each individual party and then kind of bop back and forth between those two. And that has helped in some situations as well for people to just feel like they can have a private conversation with a neutral party. And you essentially, in that case, then, all right, are the person who's going back and forth with them. Is that something that you offer?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up because I was really against caucuses, but that's because I have such a unique practice where I have couples coming directly to me wanting to work together. That makes it beautiful. Now, I do have a separate business where I have the attorneys contacting me. And that's a whole different ball game where they're not working together as nicely as those couples who come to me together. And I have learned that the caucus is a great way because I think it can kind of subdue the emotions a little bit. So yes, in certain situations, they are extremely helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one area where a lot of times people don't realize that that's an option. And I'll be honest, like there have been times when, again, women come to me and I'm like, okay, well, what has been done so far? Have you disclosed the information? Have you, looked at property division? Have you looked at child support? Have you looked at parenting? And a lot of times they're like, no, we haven't hardly done any of that. I'm like, well, then, based on my knowledge of the process, you're maybe 25% done. So, like either we got to something needs to get figured out here.
Mm-hmm.
And what ends up happening is they actually do end up, I'm like, you can either continue down the mediation path, and perhaps if the mediator isn't helping facilitate moving things along, then maybe you need to consider switching.
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe mediation isn't going to work. But what I have found most often is when we have the right mediator who's willing to caucus, who's willing to have private conversations and be that go-between, knowing what both parties wants and is good at closing the gap, we've been able to save those clients from having to go to litigation. But they did end up actually having to switch mediators. I mean, not ideal, but I'm like, either you go back to the litigation process, right? And now you're really going to have to pretty much start over, not to mention so we have been able to salvage some of those, which has been cool, to see that again, kind of what we were saying earlier. It's like, I feel like mediation, again, has to be the right fit. And one of the things I share in my bridge group is, listen, you got to be brutally honest with yourself. Do you really feel that this is going to be a good fit? You know your spouse better than anybody else that's coming in, right, to the middle of the movie. So has it been an absolute disaster over the last 20 years and you can't even be in the same room? Well, then maybe, right, unless you're going to fully do the caucusing, maybe you need to look at all of the options, right? Weigh out the pros and cons of each path and then decide.
Right.
And I think that has helped people too. Like, okay, yeah, my spouse is pushing me to do mediation. I'm feeling unsettled about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's, then, okay, we got to just have those honest conversations. And if it is a great fit, like to your point, for people that I feel like mediation is a good fit for, because there is this level of transparency and mutual respect and really truly wanting to work together, even though they might not like each other,
mm-hmm.
It works.
It does work. And it is voluntary. So you have to have two willing participants or it's not going to work.
Yep. I think that's exactly the key. Mm-hmm. And, and I know that mediation over the last, probably from my perspective, probably the last 5 years has really gotten a lot of attention and a lot of publicity and a lot of press and a lot of encouragement for people to do it because, in the hopes of like, hey, we can do this amicably. Okay. But if we look at what the definition of amicable is, it means devoid of conflict. We're going to have conflict, people.
It's going to get emotional. It just is.
I mean, right? Like, that's just not even realistic. Can we have healthy conversations? Can we work through some of the challenges? Can we have a disagreement and still show up? Sure, we can be I will go to my grave saying we can be frustrated, overwhelmed, emotional, and still not disrespect somebody. Period. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
It's possible.
It is. And it can set you up to have better relationships in the future because I don't ever want my clients back doing this again. I want them to learn. I mean, you have the opportunity to use a mediation as a gift to learn amazing communication skills and making sure that you're a good listener and that you are actually letting the person know that you hear them. And, that's what you're talking about with the respecting the other person. And
yeah, it's really important. It really is. And so, making sure that it's the right fit for them, right?
Yes.
The other part is, I know we talked about a little bit about this, but, the right mediator. Mm-hmm. And I have said, for quite some time in this space, like it really takes a very talented person to be a mediator because you're dealing with two parties that there is tension and frustration. You have to remain calm. You have to see both sides. You have to facilitate the conversation to bridge the gaps, encourage them to be thinking and leaning into things that are uncomfortable. And I don't know. I mean, I just feel like it's a real unique skill set in being, it's like, having the good negotiation skills, understanding the value of good communication, understanding, mm-hmm. how to evaluate what's important to both parties. So there's a lot. And I will sometimes play a financial neutral role and it's a big if it's the right fit. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I'm the advocate behind the scenes, and that's where I spend most of my time. But, talk to us a little bit about, from your perspective, what do you feel like, if people are considering doing mediation, what should they be looking for in a mediator? Because it's not just somebody that's sitting in the room listening to people bicker.
You are so, so right. And Rhonda, the thing that's so interesting that I kind of mentioned before is I kind of haven't thought about this because all I think about is this is a calling on my life. This is something that is a creative thing that I can do to help to see what the real issues are, to really listen to the people, see what the issues are, get them on the table. And when you can see them come to an agreement, it's beautiful. And, people are like, what? You like to do divorces? Are you nuts? And it's because it really is a beautiful process when you do it. And I think, and I've had a lot of training, and I also did a lot of soul searching and know that this is a good fit for who I am, being this neutral person that is trying to help people see both sides. I got to say, I do some in person. I really, since COVID, have learned to love the Zoom meetings because each person feels a little bit more comfortable, and so that's helpful. And it's going to be important for there to be a good fit with your mediator. And sometimes that's hard because I do free consultations for people who are going to be doing the whole divorce with me. I don't do free consultations when it's going to be a quick hitter and they just need to come in and it might be an hour or two with attorneys. And so it is absolutely okay to end it and say, this isn't a good fit. But to maybe do your research. And I know that my clients, before we meet, I have a wealth of information from my podcast, which you were a guest on, Doing Divorce Different, and all my blogs and all my information. And Rhonda, you and I also talked about I'm an attorney. Not every mediator is. And I don't think that you have to be. My mentor was not an attorney. However, he was so well versed in the law surrounding family law. He goes to every family law continuing legal education course that I go to. It is important, I believe, that when you're with people that you can understand the law in that state, because you're not going to give them any advice for certain. But most of the time, having that information on, in the state of Minnesota or Wisconsin, assets are split 50-50. They belong to both of you, whatever state you're in, to understand child custody and how that calculation is, because I get so protective of potential clients. And if they don't want to work with me, I just want to make sure that they are, meeting with someone and working with someone that is a great communicator, that's going to hear both of their issues. They're both going to feel comfortable and has an understanding of the law. I don't think it needs to be an attorney. And I will say, sometimes people who are huge litigators and who have fought through court battles have a really hard time being neutral. So it's a double-edged sword sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I think, one of the things that I think is important is, having somebody on their team. And again, then it's kind of one of those things where, we think of like the Coke machine and you're like, okay, but it's not quite as simple sometimes as I just want mediation or I just want litigation. Like sometimes there's crossover, sometimes you can build certain pieces. But I do feel like as people are going through divorce, it is important for them to have some aspect of legal input. And what that means, at least from my perspective, is having a limited scope, or review attorney that can review based on the laws in their state. Because here's the other interesting thing. We do work with some other mediators throughout the country, and they don't have to be state specific. Yeah. So like you can work in other states and create a memo of understanding and then take it back to somebody in your state and have them review it. It just opens up possibilities for people. I personally do like them to be attorneys, I like it. I think it's good. I understand that they don't necessarily have to be. But I think they have to have somebody who can really dial in, what their state laws say about certain aspects of their case.
Right, because I think you run the risk of even sometimes coming up with an agreement that's not going to hold up. I mean, you don't want to be backpedaling and have something that is useless, so that is my concern sometimes. So just to do your diligence, search through, make sure they're trained, make sure they understand the law. And I think with the, websites and social media and podcasts. There's a lot of information available for people now. So do your homework. It'll bring you some clarity, I think. And then fire them. If it's not working, that's okay.
I mean, there's truth to that, right? I think, I don't know what you see, because again, I know you work with both parties, but like, I feel like a lot of times women in particular feel very loyal to, if they hire a mediator, they hire an attorney and they're like, Rhonda, I don't want to fire them. I feel really, and I'm like, it's actually not quite as big of a deal as people think it is. Because from our perspective, and not to say it isn't emotionally, that's hard, right? Because you're like, we're so invested, and I shared my life story with them, so we build this bond with them, right? But at the end of the day, it's the file changes hands to the new person. I mean, it really, you pay whatever's left, you move forward. Most of the attorneys or mediators are not going to take it personal, because most of the time, both parties are probably thinking, okay, maybe we need to look at options, right? I mean, it's usually not a surprise.
I agree totally. And I think having that choice, knowing you always have that choice, you always have control over that. And, just to speak to, you were talking about pulling in other people, and I keep learning this as I mature and do more and more of these. When you pull in good people like divorce coaches, and I do always recommend attorneys to do on a limited scope for my clients. Some of them file on their own. But when you hire a divorce coach or a financial advisor or someone to help you with the housing options, you actually end up saving money. Because if I have clients who come to a consult who have already talked to someone like you, and then we can actually on the consult start digging in and talking about things, and it's free. That time with me is free. So it really does set you up, and it's teamwork.
Yeah. And I think, if we were to go back, right, and talk to people that we know that have gone through divorce 10, 20 years ago, right? And I know you probably hear this too. But when I was first starting my business, they were like, Rhonda, where were you, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Like, college, probably. How about that? But, it was true, because they realized, like, man, I wish I would have had a team. I had my attorney, and I mean, it wasn't necessarily bad, but the attorneys, unfortunately, right, back even 10, 20 years ago, it was they were the person to help you through your divorce, and that was it. So you're using them to help with the emotional stuff, which again, they become a pretty expensive therapist. They're giving you some general, like, hey, here's how this works with the financials, but they're not guiding necessarily like what's your best option.
Right.
And and so I think we've seen a shift in that. And I think that, the other part, and I know you kind of alluded to this too, is I think the one tricky piece about where we're at now versus where we were, even a couple years ago, is the fact that there is so much information available that it's like we don't necessarily need more information. We need wisdom.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right? We need wisdom. We need a team of people that can guide us through, right? So we don't have to go out and say, well, yeah, but I read this, because you and I both know, if they go out and read something, you're like, there's part of that's true.
Another lesson. Yes. Another lesson of COVID. Right? Yeah. I feel like.
Right. It's true. I mean, because we're never getting the full story by just, doing the old Google thing, right? It's like, there's always more to the story. And from my perspective too, there's, okay, what we read online, there's sometimes even what we know about that state. And then there's the reality. What actually happens. Right. And they're not always the same. Right? I mean, if that was the case, we could go to any judge in any county within that state and all get the same answer. And that's not happening.
That is not happening. It is not.
Right?
No.
So again, that's why I think mediation. And honestly, there are other states too that I feel like there's times when, like, you're in Minnesota. The cases that I've had in Minnesota, for whatever reason, because they were not doing necessarily mediation, are taking forever. Forever. GAL, I mean,
I'm hearing that as well.
right? Illinois, same thing. Like there's certain California is still backed up from COVID because they weren't meeting at all during COVID. So you had all these, you had like this log jam of people that were like in the midst of the process. They were all stuck. So when things opened up, they were doing those, plus all the new people that wanted to file or did file,
Right.
it's so I think, again, I think that the mediation piece certainly can be a good fit for the right people with the right mediator who understands the importance of helping with the things we talked about and being part of a team. I mean, one of the things that I did, because again, a lot of the stuff, and maybe you see this too on your stuff, like a lot of the things that I either develop or do, say, comes out of things that I see that I'm like, what is going on? We've got to do this better, like your point, better than what we're seeing, better than what, our clients are experiencing. How do we show up and give them the best possible experience, throughout this process?
Yep. And I feel this is why I have so much gratitude and feel so blessed is I feel like, hey, everyone, I'm doing this a better way. And, we've talked about how it doesn't always work, but I have the most beautiful clients that come to me. And sometimes, they don't like each other too much, but sometimes they really love each other. And there's always, a connection there. And they feel so powerful and they feel so good in their heart that they've done it a better way, that they're changing the story. We don't have to fight this out. We do not have to do this. And so that's what I love about it. So I get to see a lot of that. Like I said, that's the biggest part of my business is those lovely people that I work together. Now I see the other side. And sometimes what is a little bit tricky for me in Minnesota, you have to go through a mediator. I don't feel like that's always voluntary. And so because they have to, check this box, we have to go through this mediator. And so, this is controversial. Not everybody loves this, but what I do is I schedule 1 hour with this couple because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want them to rack up attorney. A lot of mediators say 4-hour minimum, we'll meet for 4 hours or whatever it is. I disagree because you're going to know in an hour if you're going to be towards something or not. And if you give yourself an hour, you can usually write something up pretty quick. So I like to do that because I want to help as many people as I can. But that is one tricky thing in the state of Minnesota where they're saying, yep, you have to go to mediation before you file a motion in court. That makes it tricky because it's not really voluntary then, is it?
No, it isn't. And we've seen that particularly, I've seen that particularly in Wisconsin where people will be required, not every case, but required to do parenting mediation. And it's like they go in there. I mean, I don't even know that I can count on one hand the ones that worked.
Yep, that makes it hard. There's not buy-in. Now, I have done some in Wisconsin as well. And this is me. This is my story. This is what I would love mediators to do is I sit down with this couple and I say, this is your opportunity. I tell them about how this is going to be so beneficial for your children. I try to get them. I mean, do you have a picture of your kids? When you can get them talking about that and get them on the same page, but that takes work. It's not just sitting in a room like thinking you have to make them see the value and the opportunity that they have in that moment to create something and not have someone else tell them what they're going to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. And I think, when people can identify too, like, okay, what's important to them, right? I mean, they're going to agree that their kids are important. So let's start there. Okay, great. Now, and again, to our point where we were saying earlier, this is why, right? I think it's so important to have a good mediator.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yes. And I will say, I am trying to train a couple people. Susan Guthrie is amazing. She trains so many. I'm just like in awe of her, but I am trying to train some people in Minnesota so that they, even if they're not attorneys, they can understand the law because we need more people who are high quality communicators, who are great at figuring out what the issue is. Because if you don't know what the issue is and they're not always going to tell you, you can't help them.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. There's the problem solving, component of that for sure. For
Mhm.
sure. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of areas within this space, right, that need, kind of on the extremes, right? We need more qualified, quality mediators who really truly are committed, to being able to help people navigate through the process. And it's not just something they do, that they're truly passionate,
Mhm.
about doing it. And the second thing is, I think on the flip side, again, kind of outside of the scope of our conversation, but I think we need more work also on the high conflict abuse situations, because within the court system, there is so much abuse that's happening. And so we've got kind of like these two
I know.
two
I know.
paradigms that just there's so much work to be done. Um, but at the same time, I think we can also reflect back on, how things have shifted over the years. And I think, there's so many people. Why are we having, which we were talking about a little bit before we hopped on here, the whole gray divorce conversation. Well, why are we even having that conversation? We're having the conversation because now people feel like they have a little more support at that stage in their life to be able to part ways. And, I look at my grandparents, right? I mean, it's not to say they couldn't have gotten divorced. It's not to say they didn't bicker like crazy, and they probably, in some regards, should have, but it was never really accepted. They didn't do it.
Yeah, I think
But
that's,
if it was,
yeah.
they
Yeah,
may have.
I think that's true. And I think that people are saying, hey, I still have a lot of my life in front of me, and I don't want to live it like this.
No.
So yeah, I think there's some other funky things going on too. I don't know if as many people are getting married as they were. And so maybe there's just a whole, but I will say that probably 30 to 40% of my clients are retired, and it's tricky because you need to figure out how they're going to divide up everything somewhat equally, and the
Yep.
income after retirement. I often have financial advisors involved in that, but that's a big piece of a gray divorce.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, I think the piece with that I have found, because I've done some speaking on that as well, and I think at the end of the day, it's hard because their biggest challenge at that stage is time.
Mhm.
Because you look at what you have collected together, retirement assets, homes, whatever, and potentially there's some stuff there that can get split.
Mhm.
But of course, that's going to impact, right, what the life looks like. And then there's for the people that there's not a whole lot there. So that picture gets even more bleak
Oh,
because the reality of, gosh, we didn't do as good of a job saving. This is really going to impact me. I'm now really going to be on a fixed income. What does this look like? I mean, there's so many dynamics, and they don't have enough time in those situations to recover, like maybe somebody who's, a little bit earlier. So
well,
it's hard.
yeah, and speaking to that, it just popped into my head, some clients that I had that were thinking about working with me, and we really, really thought through it. And they didn't pull the trigger, and it was financial. They just decided we're just going to continue on as we have been. And, that is a little sad, but they couldn't afford to separate out, to live,
Yeah.
and they were really trying to find ways, like maybe live in the house together. But it just got so complicated that they decided not to move ahead with it. I think there are some other reasons where maybe they were going to try a little therapy, because I really do always want people to be absolutely certain that this is the step that they want to take. It's a big decision. It's a big deal to get divorced.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I know. And I think, I think that's wise. And, one of the things that I did recently on an article that I was featured in the AARP magazine for April, and we were talking about the situation was similar to the one that you were mentioning, Lisa, which is, okay, you've got this couple, they have actually been separated for 6 years. Um, He is now collecting on his pension. She was living in a duplex, all this kind of stuff, just kind of maintaining that. And it was, okay, where do we go from here? He's moved on, has another relationship. She's still, just kind of navigating her way through the situation and really kind of stepping into her own or whatever. But it was like, okay, we went through and we looked at all these different scenarios. And it was like, okay, well, at the end of the day, how do we boil this down? What are the options? Well, the options are you stay married, you get divorced, or is there a third option? And the third one that just kind of came out of us brainstorming was, okay, what if you were to do a postnup?
Yes.
Right? Now, of course, they need to have an attorney to help with all of that. But that was something that we kind of I was like, you know what? I've seen this work well for clients, that you've got this line in the sand, you have the clarity, you can start to move forward. I think it can be a good option. And I think, quite frankly, to your point around the trends, I think that we're going to probably see more of either the postnups or not necessarily the prenups if the marriage rates continue to decline, but we need to make sure as women, us girls here on this call, that we are taking the time to say, if I'm going to be moving in with somebody, if I'm going to be purchasing a home with somebody, I got to get my what in order and make sure that I am protected. Because if we don't, we're not going to fall under the laws for the marital property. And guess what? Then when things, down the road happen, then we're really going to be in a pickle. Rhonda, because we're not going to have our stuff in order.
I know, and I'm passionate about what you're saying there too, because I can't tell you the amount of clients that are like, well, I mean, we don't care. We just wanted to. I'm like, well, you're in a legally. This is like a partnership. Getting married is a big deal too, and you need to make sure that you understand how it's going to look if you're not together, and how that's going to affect if you have a business or, you're bringing money into it. And there are non-marital assets as well, but it is a box of worms kind of. But I think the postnup is a great idea. Another thing that some people do in Minnesota is a legal separation. Not a bad idea, because in Minnesota, I think it's different in Wisconsin, but in Minnesota, if you legally separate, it's really easy to make that into a divorce, like to transform that into a divorce. It's not like you wasted all your time, and it allows you to separate out your finances, but still maybe you're not quite ready to go with the full blown. So that's another option.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually it is fairly similar in Wisconsin. I know some states though that we work in, legal separation is not even an option. So people do certainly need to check that out.
Yes.
But
yes, sure.
It is, there's all these different things where it's like, I don't know about you, but there's some days where you're like, if we didn't like learning, this is not the place for us to be. I mean, right? Like, think about how many hours you and I have put into owning this niche. And this is all we do, right? And you're like, every single day I'm learning something new, hands down.
And I love it because I am a lifelong learner.
Right?
Not want it.
That's right.
Way, but and plus empowering women. That's so amazing. And that's why you're so amazing in what you do too. I mean, that is really your passion. And my hat's off to you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and again, I think that's, just kind of to put kind of a full circle, right? It's like there's so many different little nuances through this process that you have to, from my perspective, unless it's a super short-term marriage with no assets and no kids, you've got to make sure that you've got the people that can help facilitate the process, that can be a sounding board as you're kind of navigating through the pieces. Because if you and I are in this space and this is all we do, and we're constantly learning something new, having somebody come in that hasn't done the work, right, or isn't in this space, how would they know? How would they know?
Absolutely. And I can't, and even doing podcasts like this and doing my own, I feel like I learned so much. That opened up so much new information to me. But you are so right. every day I am humbled by what I learned. And I think, I can't believe I didn't know that sometimes, because this is all I do. But
Right.
yeah, truly. And to have someone in your corner means if there's something that comes up that I don't know the answer to, I'm going to find it for you,
That's
because
right.
I need to know that for the future. And I'm here to help you and support you. So that
Yep.
is another reason to have those teammates who can know where to look for the answers to, sometimes when it's something that hasn't been seen before.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of information, but absolutely there are going to be times where like, that's a great question. Let's reach out to some of our contacts or our connections or do some research on,
Mhm.
that's the beauty of it, right?
Yes.
So I have to say, I have so enjoyed our conversation. Very free flowing, thank you for just being open to having a casual, transparent, honest conversation, which I feel like most of them are, but you were very open, right, to kind of going where the conversation flowed. So thank you so much for that.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a pleasure. It's gone so fast. I love chatting with you. I mean, chatting with people who are passionate about what they do is one of my favorite things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. We will include Lesa's information in the show notes, so do not hesitate to check out her information as well as her parenting course. And just so grateful that we can share some really amazing insight with you today. Until next time, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Rhonda.